Brianna, you and I and our dogs are going to have so much fun today. You were telling me about all your dogs before we started, so I had chased mine out to my husband's office, but I brought them back in so that they could join the show. So what is your dog's name?
This is Birdie. She's one of 4. And then I've got Bucket, Dagwood, and Banjo, and who knows where they are. I'm up on my property, so they're out having their adventures.
I know about Bucket and Dagwood, so I didn't know about the others. So that's so cute. Okay, mine I'm going to put down because otherwise they're going to knock my computer over. I'll just make a little noise in the background, but that should be okay. I think this podcast is a lot about dogs, so we should be fine. Okay, well, Brianna, now that I've put out my dogs down and your little doggy seems to have gone to the back of your couch or wherever it's gone, you've written 2 amazing books, Nowhere for Very Long and Never Leave the Dogs Behind. That's why we had to start the podcast with our dogs, because we neither of us leave our dogs behind. So, and it's a great story of your life of courage and all kinds of things that you've gone through. And so just I've done the introduction, so people have heard a bit about you, but it's always so nice to hear from, the author, what the book's about and why you wrote them. And then we can dive into all the details of all the great stuff.
Great. My very first book, Nowhere for Very Long, I started out writing it thinking it was going to be some sort of an adventure memoir that focused a lot more on the time that I spent living in a van. I would go into all of these crazy slot canyons and do a lot of climbing and mountain biking. And as I sat down to start writing it, it became less about how or the things that I was doing, and it became more about why I was doing them. And why I had sort of really run from a very traditional lifestyle, and the only lifestyle that I saw growing up, which was, go to school, get married, buy a house, have kids, work until you retire, and then hope that you're still able-bodied enough to go out and see the world afterwards. And I just thought, that seems backwards. And so my first book, I talk about moving out to Utah, sight unseen, and just falling in love with the desert and going from a middle-class girl in Connecticut who thought she was going to wear high heels in New York City every weekend to living in a van, no running water, out in the middle of the desert with my dogs and my now ex-husband. And it was just this brilliant, beautiful adventure. And then, unfortunately, my second book details the end of my marriage and sort of picks up where the first book left off, and really just talks about how my dogs are the only reason that I survived the most difficult time period of my life. And so in my second book, I talk about buying my property, 9 acres of desert out in the middle of nowhere with no dry, completely undeveloped land. And I only had the courage to do it because at the end of every day, I would climb into bed and my dogs just looked at me as though I could do anything in the whole world. And, I don't think many people give us that sort of truly unconditional love and support and excitement. And, like you just said it, you could walk out after this recording and your dogs would act like they hadn't seen you in 2 weeks and it's been, an hour or whatever it is. And so, that was something that just kept me going when I felt like I had lost everything else in my life.
Okay, so this is a podcast that really explores mental health, not just from a trauma perspective, but from a human perspective. So it's not just, mental health is not sickness. It's the challenges that all of us go through in life, and it's the ups and downs. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, 2, and 3, the day-to-day struggles. Then we've got our habits, and then we have our traumas right on the other end of the scale. But in the midst of all of it, it's all about us being alive as humans, facing challenges, going on our journeys, etc., etc. So you've just outlined briefly this part of your journey, and so I'd love you to go into more detail. Now, which order would you like to start with? Do you want to start with because obviously the book chronicles. 2 books chronicle the whole history. So right. I'd love you to go into a little bit more detail because there's so many life lessons that you've learned and so many great things and so much great encouragement that you can give our listeners. So let's start with, let's chronicle your hero's journey.
Great. Awesome.
And the lessons you've learned along the way.
Yeah. So I think the very first thing was when I was growing up, I was faced with what felt like, how do I want to say this? When I was growing up, I felt like I wasn't given options There was nobody showed me a different way of living, even though I felt like there's got to be something different than this. There's got to be something more adventurous. And I remember growing up and hearing everybody talk about all the things they were going to do in this life. They were going to start a band. They were going to write a book. They were going to move here. They're going to do this and that and the other. And then I just would watch as these people's dreams sort of seemed to get pushed away, put on the shelf. And I didn't want that for myself. And I was so overwhelmed with like, well, what am I going to do with my life if I don't follow this exact example? And the thing that helped me the most was I started with, what do I not want from my life? And I worked because that's a lot easier to identify, what do I not want to feel like every day? What do I not want to, I don't want to wake up one day and wonder where all of this time has gone. And so prioritizing, like, I'm going to make sure that I don't end up wondering where my life went and feeling like I'm running out of time. And so that was a very helpful place for me to start. And then I moved on to a sailboat, mainly because I couldn't afford an apartment. And so this boat, it had no running water, no air conditioning. And this is humid. This is still back on the East Coast. So this was over the summer. I only had one of my dogs. And it was the first time in my whole life that I had to figure out the day-to-day things that I had taken for granted, like turning on a faucet. Wow. Or pushing a button on the wall to change the temperature. It was more of, I was so deeply present in every single moment. And that was so new to me. And that to me felt very human. Like that felt more like being alive. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah. It was intentional. It was sort of, and it made me so grateful. I mean, still to this day, when I can get out of bed and stand all the way upright, I'm like, how lucky am I? Because you live in a car for 2.5 years. These little things that you take for granted. And I just felt like living on the sailboat and then moving out to Utah and moving into this old van, it made me very malleable. And I felt like that was much safer because where I grew up, I watched people build these empires in this very wealthy part of the country. And I was on the outskirts. My family was not wealthy. But I watched everybody build all of this stuff. And then it goes away or something happens or a hurricane comes through and your house is gone. And people just felt like that was the end of their world. And I've always been so comforted in thinking like, even if it gets back to me needing to live in my van again, I'm okay with that. I'm used to that. And so it sort of has made me feel like the risks I've taken have made me feel so much more secure in whatever happens, I will be able to figure it out. Because that's what living that way that's the highlight of it. When you live in a van, or even right now, I'm living in my trailer up on my property. Again, don't have running water, don't have any temperature control. But I like it that way.
Wi-Fi.
Uh-oh. Did I lose you?
Okay. I'm making a joke. I said, you don't have water and timber, but you've got Wi-Fi. Let's get our priorities here.
I have Wi-Fi. Elon Musk, he's, an evil warlock, as I like to say, but it's very convenient. I used to have to get in the car, drive 40 minutes into town, sit outside the public library, and try to park close enough to steal their Wi-Fi. And yeah, honestly, it felt to me, and it still feels this way, especially now as I'm getting older and watching everybody really settle down. And I'm 34. So, in the last 2-3 years, everyone I know has had children. Everyone I know is just very much along that path and happy with it. A lot of them really love that life. And for me, I almost feel like it's getting more and more fun the older I get, to sort of continuously laugh in the face of societal expectations, if that makes any sense. I like being the black sheep. I like being the oddball. I like thinking that maybe there's a kid or a young girl or anybody who doesn't see their own dreams sort of represented in the life around them. I love to think that I am potentially someone that I would have loved to hear from growing
Yeah.
up that I would have loved to say, like, oh, there's another way. It's certainly not as glamorous, that's for sure. But it can just bring you to life in a totally different way.
That's amazing. These are so many lovely things you've said there. And the one thing a couple of things that really stood out is where you made that list of what you don't want, which is, I'm sure people have done that before, but it's the first time I've heard it kind of like that, where you actually get down on normally it's what's my intention, what's my goal. It's such a
5-year plan. Yeah.
that's what this last 50, 60, 70 years has done to people sort of moving forward in their lives, and everything on time management and everything on achieving and optimizing. And you sat down and said, what I don't want, and decided to challenge. Now, I assume that you're not trying to tell everyone to go live in a trailer or go to the desert. That was a way you were authentic to yourself.
Yes,
and
exactly.
you didn't want that. You wanted to experience life hands-on. And what was also interesting, what you were saying, was about how being in the present moment, when you didn't have that AC, when you could stand up straight and not be squashed from sleeping in a car and that kind of thing, how you appreciated those small things and being present. But that what you didn't have made you present in the moment. And then what you didn't have made you appreciate so much more what you did have.
Exactly.
These are things that people are paying thousands of dollars and doing all kinds of programs to learn how to be present in the moment, to be grateful for the little things in life, to be, people do gratitude journals for, you know what I'm saying. Okay.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
for like 5 things I'm grateful for. If I can turn on the tap, I'm grateful. And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me from what I know about you, what I've heard about you, and what I've read about you, is that you've really learned to appreciate the little things in life, and that's what's missing a little bit in our society in terms of mental health. That maybe part of our mental health is. And it's not that you haven't been without your challenges. I mean, you've had lots of challenges, and I'd love you to talk about those and how you manage those. But I just wanted to kind of sort of summarize what you were initially saying. Have I read you correctly?
Yes, 100%. Very well. No surprise.
Good. Well, I think that you've just taught us all something. Let's look at maybe what we don't want as opposed to what we do want, and shift over to appreciating just every little tiny thing in life, which is so amazing. Okay, so your dogs play a massive role. But before we get to your dogs, they play a role in your first book too. Why the desert? I mean, Connecticut is this really green, lush, beautiful. I've been there a few times. It's gorgeous. And the desert, yes, it's its own beauty. But wow, that's a contrast. Was that just who you are, the contrast, or why the desert and why Utah?
Utah, in the beginning, I moved there purely because it was affordable. Growing up on the East Coast, if you wanted to run away, it was like California. That's where you go. I was going to go be free on the beach in California. And I took one look at the Craigslist apartment listings and said, holy cow, there's not a single thing I can afford. So in my mind, I thought Salt Lake City I was just going to sort of make my way there. I was going to get a job in Salt Lake City. Employment rates were high. Rent was low. And at the time, nobody moved to Utah. Now everybody knows it as great skiing, and we've got all the national parks, and every John Wayne movie ever was filmed out here. It really is sort of still Wild West. But when I moved out there, I mean, everyone was like, Utah? Are you going to go get a couple more wives, or you never want to drink beer again? Like the usual sort of stereotypes of Utah. But it was culture shock for sure. It was very, very different. And I found the desert. I mean, the first time that I went there, I'd probably been living up in Salt Lake City for about a year and had never really ventured. I didn't have a whole lot of money, so had never really ventured outside. And the desert starts about 3 hours south of Salt Lake City. And I will never forget coming over this particular pass, and you've reached, the highest altitude, and you start dropping down into the valley, and everything starts to the sky gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I just remember feeling, and I'm not a very, like I always say, I'm not a very woo-woo kind of person, but I really thought, I think I've been here before, or I could not explain it. And I think what I love the most about it out here is that it is so, so different from where I grew up. I mean, with the skyscrapers and the buildings and the tall trees, and it's beautiful, but it's packed in. It's really packed in. And I feel like there's a lot of things in my life that I didn't see coming. My father abandoned me when I was a teenager,
Sorry.
and I've had a very difficult, if not non-existent relationship with him. The end of my marriage really kind of came out of nowhere for me. And I don't know what it is about the desert, but like being able to see what's coming and sort of being able to look around and know that I'm really alone. Like I can see all the way out my door to the other side of my property, and just there's nobody. It feels safe. It doesn't feel like anybody can sneak up on me. And I know that's a bit of a trauma response, but it's still just, it's so comforting. I love the warmth. I love that anything that survives out here has to have an incredible will, very deep roots. When things bloom out here, it just feels triumphant. Like there's just something very simple and remarkable about the desert. And I also love that, like this afternoon, I am going to take the dogs over to one of my favorite places, which is where this little stream crosses over this little dirt road, and it makes a nice puddle to sit in. And there's a big shady tree, and it's like, what an oasis.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the desert is really one of the only places where I think you can look at a puddle and be like, this is going to be a great afternoon. And so again, it's sort of that like zoomed in, really appreciative, if you find a tree out here that's tall enough to cast shade, it's like awesome, just little things that make you so grateful. And I think being in a harsh environment really amplifies that.
That's incredible. That you can appreciate the puddle and the tree and the resilience. And it's so interesting how you say you feel safe. You don't feel like anyone can, approach. You can see what's out there. What about and this is probably, you ask this probably all the time. What about before I ask this question, you said it maybe a trauma response. Maybe, but maybe this is what you need. Does everything have to be a trauma response? Yes, we do have responses. And yes, you did have a rough childhood growing up. And that's definitely obviously led to certain decisions, because that's what it does. But somehow you seem to have, turned that around, so maybe that's your coping, that's strategy that makes you feel authentic.
Yes.
And look at it from another angle, maybe. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that
No, that's very true.
Is it authenticity? Is this Brianna? Is this what you need?
I think, honestly, I think it took me a while to sort of, after my divorce, I felt like I was walking the line between independence and total isolation. And I think that that's where the lines of what the desert meant to me got a little blurred. And I thought, I'm out here hiding, not I'm out here living. And, as time is a wonderful healer. As time has gone on, it's like, I can't imagine if my life had gone a different way, because I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't have this little piece of desert to call my own. And so at first the desert was this adventure, and then it was a safe place to hide. And now it's sort of come full circle to be both of those things, which I think is perfect. Like it's a great way. I mean, for me, I'm like, there's a lot worse habits that I could have than disappearing into a canyon for the afternoon, So yeah, even if it was a coping mechanism, it has very much transformed back into, this is where I'm meant to be. And I think I really struggled when I got divorced because, I've always been very adventurous and independent, but realistically, living this way alone is a whole different ball game. And I think for a while I felt like, am I just trying to keep living this former life that I had? Am I trying to prove to myself that I still can? And I think in a way I was, but I also was able to realize, like, this is my story now. Like, our story happened in the same sort of environment, and it ended in this environment. And I don't have to treat my adventures out here as trying to replace something that I had before. This is just a different chapter. I'm taking what I learned from that. I mean, my ex and I were together for 11 years,
Wow.
19 to 30.
Yeah, that's a
So
long, that's a very
it's
informative time as well. It's a whole
exactly.
kind of lifetime on its own, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's almost like it took me a while to realize like a lot of the things that I've done in my life, it wasn't because of my ex-husband. It was because I wanted to, and he was along for the ride, and vice versa. But I think when you spend those years together, you sort of become intertwined. You don't know which dream necessarily belonged to who wanted something more than the other person. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think I've been able to, like, the fact that I'm out here and I did what I said I was going to do, because even when we were married, I said, I want to buy property in the desert. I want to build a house in the desert. I want to live way out there off the grid. I want to have the dirt under my toes all the time. And I've done that.
It's amazing.
And it started out as a dream shared with somebody else, but I finished it on
You
my own because it was mine. It was ours, but now it's mine. And I think that that's been a helpful way for me to sort of process my divorce. I think you can be so angry, and I tried. I think we all, anger served me very well for a while because it gave me this brute strength. I was like fueled by rage and I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And that served its purpose for me, for sure. But I also realized, like, what am I going to do? Act like that whole third of my life didn't have beautiful parts, amazing parts. And it's hard to acknowledge those and recognize that that's over now. But it also is such a disservice to yourself to act like there weren't wonderful things that came from it. I can't write off that entire time in my life. And so it's been helpful for me to sort of think of that as a jumping off point to what my real dreams actually were.
That's amazing. So in other words, one of the things I say all the time on this podcast and in my work is that you can't change your story. You actually can't, because whatever's happened to you and whatever you've gone through, it's always forever there. What you can do is change what it looks like inside of you, your mind, brain, body network, and therefore how it plays out into your future. So, that if I had to sort of take a theme of this particular interview, this discussion with you, I'd say it's that. I mean, these things happen to you from your childhood all the way through your marriage, your divorce, your deciding what I don't want, etc. And then you've changed what it looks like inside of you, and you've transformed it. You've made it play out into your dream. I love how you said that. I love how you said you think it was your dream, then it became a mixed dream, but now you're living out your dream.
Yes.
Despite that. And I like the anger part, because I think anger, we all know, no emotion is bad, and anger serves its purpose. As you quite rightly said, it gave you something to deal with initially, but then you realized you couldn't stay there. So there was a growth that happened in your mental well-being, your mental health, to you as a person, in your mind. There was a growth, and that growth showed you resilience. It showed you can fulfill your dreams. You can still do what you don't want to not happen. You can do what you do want. All that stuff happens. So instead of becoming bitter and twisted and giving up and running away, you actually embraced and processed and reconceptualized.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that's really beautiful. This divorce you've spoken about a lot. Do you want to talk about, because you actually say in your book here, I'm going to read this because it was just really nice. Pursuing a life of intention isn't always what it seems. In fact, at times it was downright boring, exhausting, and even desperate. And I'd like to touch a little bit on that, because it sounds almost idyllic, but nothing ever in life is idyllic. But also that's part of what we need. We can't just have the up. We've got to have the down to appreciate the up. When Bertha overheated, which is your car, I assume, and she was forced to pull over on a lonely stretch of South Dakota highway, when the weather was bitterly cold and her water jugs froze beneath her, she slept in the parking lot of her office. When she was worried about money, her marriage, and the looming question mark of her future, Brianna was committed to living a life true to herself, come what may, and that made all the difference. And that's what you've done. You've really done that. So talk a little bit about, 11 years together, coming to the desert.
Yeah, my ex-husband and I knew each other since we were 10 years old. And I think what we bonded over was our shared desire to get out of Dodge. Like, we both just felt like we didn't fit in where we grew up. And so he was such an incredible partner to have and to find. And I'm so grateful, because I don't know that I would have had the courage to just move
On your
out to
own,
Utah
yeah.
on my own. I didn't know anybody in the whole state. I mean, and so it was very, very helpful to have him. And I'm always grateful to him for that. And, unfortunately, our marriage, my ex is an alcoholic and an addict, and it caught me by surprise. I think it is the most Freudian thing in the world. I married my father, like down to the T, down to the addictions, like every single thing. And
Wow. I'm sorry.
it's hard to sort of look back and recognize that, especially when it's all you'd known. But yeah, the end of our marriage was really, I didn't see it coming. And I still, for like 2 years after the fact, I would wake up and go, oh, I haven't heard from, like, it was almost like I thought I was still married. Like it was very much a shock to me. I, didn't, and I think I was a little too focused on myself, which now I've come to understand is fine. Like, I think, one of the big things is I have had a large Instagram following for years.
Mm-hmm.
And, that sort of cropped up rather quickly. I didn't wake up and say, I'm going to be an influencer. It sort of came along naturally back in the day when that was first becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And, my ex didn't want any part of it. And I didn't ask him. I think I was so excited because people were reading my writing, because that's really what it was. I had the cool van and the cute dogs and the pretty pictures, but people stayed for my writing and immediately encouraged me, like, you should write a book. I could read a whole book of your captions. And so I think what's interesting is my ex would probably say, and I know I've heard, some criticisms from random people who followed us on the internet, that I chose Instagram over my marriage.
People can say ridiculous things.
Well, and for a while I thought, oh gosh, did I? But then I thought, wow, we really like to give women titles that keep them in their place.
Oh, yeah.
Because I didn't choose being an influencer over my marriage. This is my career. I've always wanted to write a book. I've always wanted to have an audience to speak to, because frankly, I feel like I have something to say.
Exactly.
And that was one of the last things that I said to my ex-husband was, I think realistically, we grew apart. We wanted different things. And that was really the core message of it. But because of all of these people on the internet had watched our relationship and everybody felt like they knew pieces of it, it just became so messy. But at the end of the day, yeah, it took me a long time to be like, I was not too much. He was just not enough for me, and that's okay. I was too much for him. But yeah, it definitely still hurt. I felt like a failure, which is so ironic because my mother got divorced. My dad cheated on her. Never in a million years would I have said the things to her that I would say to myself in my head. And yeah, I think that was hard. It was hard. I remember one of the worst things that I read, and I don't know why this stuck with me, but I had posted, finally, I had to come out and give a statement basically about the fact that I had gotten divorced, which is so strange. But finally I was like, okay, people are just sort of commenting and wondering, and where's your husband, and asking all these kinds of questions. So I finally had to come out and say it. And somebody tagged a friend underneath my photo and said, oh, so depressing that the whole thing was fake.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought,
that's so
I am really two-dimensional. I was like, I am really two-dimensional to these people. We've known each other since we were 10. And just to think that people saw it, and because it ended, that meant the whole thing was fake. And that's really where I started clinging on to this, like, no, it was very real. The wonderful things and the horrible things. It's just to completely discredit an entire story because of the way that it ends. I mean, I wouldn't be able to write books if that was a philosophy that I believed in.
Isn't that so patriarchal, though, if you think of it? I mean, with not even too much of a stretch, because it's like your identity was in your marriage and
Yes.
pulling away from that unit was gone, so now you were gone. Meanwhile, you were there, from the beginning, sort of thing.
Yes.
So this shows that kind of just a bias in society.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I felt like it was a lot of, like my therapist told me, she's like, if you needed to give an elevator pitch, it would sound so similar to the reasons that so many folks' relationships end, which is you wanted different things, your careers were going in different directions, and there's really nothing wrong with that. And I think the added pressure of social media
made it very difficult,
hugely detrimental to, I almost feel like I'm able to process it more now. And it's been 4 years, but it's because the aftermath online has died down. Everybody knows I'm divorced. My books are out. And that is such a huge weight. Because I used to puke my guts out on Instagram. I used to tell everybody every little thing, and all of my captions were so beautifully edited, and I felt like after that, when people started, after my divorce, people would sort of descend on my page and start talking about it as if it was like a tabloid. And I thought, I don't want anybody to be able to just stumble upon this deeply personal information. And so that's where my books were just total safety. Because if you get 148 pages in and you decide that you don't agree with me, whatever, you're right. You have gotten a full gist and you have every right to disagree.
Context. Yeah, but you don't have the context from 1 or 2 or 3 social media posts, or even even following you for a long time. It's still tiny pieces of the puzzle. Yes. So it's actually great that you put that into a book. And also, being with an addict, that's an alcoholic. Was that something that started in the desert, or had it started before? Was that something that you didn't know about? Did it influence you? Did that affect you? Did you get into addiction at any stage? I'm asking you very direct questions, but these are questions
so what really happened was my ex-husband accidentally ran one of our dogs over. Yeah. And that was a huge story because he survived. He's laying in the sun out there right now. And this will be 6 years in October. Wow. So he's a genuine medical miracle. He's amazing. And
I remember that story.
Yeah. And so it started there. And I know the guilt. I never blamed him. I tried so hard to not let the internet find out who was driving. I couldn't do that to him. He was falling apart. And our dogs are our children. So I don't know a love greater than that. I'm sure if I had a child, it would be different. But
I get that.
Almost kill and permanently maim the thing you love most in the world. I never blamed him for a second with how impossible it was to deal with that. What I do regret, I should have seen it, but I think I was also in a place where I didn't want to face reality. So I think we were both drinking quite a bit, and I guess I still saw it as it's really amazing to me that amazing in a sad way that two people can sit down and have the same glass of something in their hand. And one person can be saying yay, this is a fun night. We're having a great time. And another person is like, this is medication. I need to numb myself. And so I think just not recognizing that was the case. And, addicts are brilliant at hiding things
and lying
but it's still,
it's
afterwards
devastating for you. It's devastating.
Yes. And it's because it's a mix of shame and embarrassment, and everybody's looking at you like, how could you not know? How could you not have known how bad it was? And it just makes you question everything. And then, I started wondering, did I enable him? Did I not want to see? I think that's the biggest thing is I just kept thinking, if we can get through this recovery, I mean, Dagwood, our dog's recovery was almost a year, different surgeries, physical therapy, all kinds of stuff. And I just kept thinking, if we can get this behind us and we can get back to the desert, we had to stop living in the van and in the desert. I mean, our dog was severely injured. We couldn't, he needed to be in sterile environments. So we started renting a place and we kind of went back to normal life.
Yeah.
And from there, it just went downhill. And I almost think that my ex and I were better adventure partners than we were life partners, because it fell apart from there. And yeah, I think I was so hoping that it would go back to normal once Dagwood got better, and it just got worse and worse. I mean, as it does, such a slippery slope.
It's the greatest gift we have is free will. And, that choice, as you said, two people having the same drink, and why does one choose this way and why does one choose the other way? And we can't go blaming the brain. The brain doesn't do anything. The brain just responds. It's something in us that we make these choices, and it's really hard to deal with that. Yeah. But and it's so true, all the questions that one goes through, like you were saying, and how did you miss it, and could you have done more, and with this and this, and it's a lot of trauma, but you got through that, and now you're living the dream and your dog. So let's just I've got to do another interview soon. Unfortunately, my editor will edit this out as well, but I've got to jump off in about 4 minutes. And I didn't realize it's already, we've been talking like 40 minutes, and it's like,
I know. Sorry, I can go on and on and on.
And I definitely want to have you back on again. But okay, so Daniel edit that out from my comment before. Daniel's our editor, as I said, and we'll pick up from here now. Well, this is just, it's just so, thank you for being so raw and honest and open and so encouraging. And there's so many life lessons and so much about resilience and just, pushing through that. I didn't want this, and such great stuff. But tell us, you've mentioned about Dagwood, you've mentioned about your dogs, but just in a sort of lightning round, tell us about your dogs and what an important role, which we know they play, why, how. Talk about your dogs. We started with dogs, let's end with dogs.
Yes, of course. I think, honestly, I have my dogs to thank for being here right now where I am. Even moving on to the sailboat, it was because I couldn't afford a dog-friendly apartment. I couldn't find one. And I said, I will live under an overpass before it was the first thing I did when I graduated college was get my first dog, Bucket. I was 21. She's right here next to me. So she's 13 and a half.
Wow.
And then I moved out to Utah and I found Dagwood. He looks like a little dingo, and he's so wild. And he just brought that wildness out of me, I think. And seeing him out in the desert, he just fits out here. And so it was like the joy of seeing him out here was what kept bringing me back to the desert. And then Birdie, I adopted right as I was getting divorced. And she had been dumped on the side of the highway. Aww. And I think I looked at her and said, here's something I can save. Aww. Because I didn't know how I couldn't save what was happening around me, the person I loved, the life that we had made. And she is just so, she almost like is one of those dogs that looks grateful every day. She just looks so grateful.
That's so
and
cute.
Yeah, she got me through my divorce. I mean, she made me laugh. She's so goofy. And it was like, in the wake of moving out, I remember the only reason I really got out of bed was because she was still a puppy. And I thought she deserved the life that Bucket and Dag would have had. Yeah. And then I adopted Banjo, who was a 7-week-old pudgy little puppy who just brought unbelievable amounts of joy into my life. It was like a new beginning with this new little, and all he had ever known was this life. And he'd only ever known me as his mom. And it was, they just all have played such integral roles in certain parts of my life and collectively sort of make up who I am and how I've ended up where I've ended up. And so they're like a little living representation of my world.
Oh my gosh, that's just so beautiful. What a way to end this discussion number 1. I just have so many more things I'd like to
Yes, I would love to talk to you more.
Talking about this, it's just so fantastic. Well, thank you for your encouragement and for, for sharing your life with us, because it's so helpful to
Yeah,
help all of us just to keep pushing on. Life is just so worth living despite all the challenges, and
absolutely.
life is just really worth living, and bringing
Absolutely.
the dogs into the equation really makes it absolutely beautiful. So thank you for joining. Thank you for joining me today. And where can people find you, follow you?
So you can find all the information about my books at my website, which is just briannamadia.com. And I'm also on Instagram, just my name, Brianna Madia. Look for lots of dogs and you'll know you're in the right place.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to the next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.